Hello everyone, welcome to the video, and today we're going to be talking about one of the best strength builds that you can get in Elden Ring. But before we get into the video, I would like to ask you guys to drop a like and a sub on the video if you either drink water or if you enjoyed the build. It would help me out a lot and I would really appreciate it. But with that being said, another thing I wanted to mention was that if you guys have any trouble getting any of the items for the build specifically, or any of the past builds that I've made, or any future builds, you can go to aoa.com and you can get any item in the game. They sell them incredibly cheap, as well as any rune you might need or material, any crafting item. They have every single item in the game, so it makes your life a lot easier. You could also use the discount code Seraph for 3% off. I'll put the link in the description. But with that being said, let's get right into the video. So the first thing we always talk about is the gear of the build. So for this build specifically, we are focused on the Great Sword. I have the heavy variant, so for this one I actually have two of them, and with the first one's Ash of War, I have the Lion's Claw. This is the one that makes me do a front flip. You could easily do the Bloodhound Step if you want a little bit more mobility, and it makes it a little bit better for PvP. Then for the Sacred Seal, we have the Claw Mark Seal, just because it scales with strength, and the Parrying Dagger. For the fashion of the build, we have the Black Wolf Mask, the Champion Pauldron, the Zamor Bracelets, and the Elden Lord Greaves. This fashion is not ideal. I think it just looks really good. However, if you want a little bit more protection and practicality, you can easily go with something different. For the talismans of the build, we have the Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman, which boosts our physical damage negation. We have the Claw Talisman, which enhances jump attacks, very important for the build. Then we have the Great Jars Arsenal, which increases our equipment load. And then last but not least, we have the Shard of Alexander, which greatly boosts the attack power of skills. For our flask, we have the Stone Barb Cracked Tier, which makes stance break easier. And then we have the Opaline Hard Tier, which increases all damage negation. We then have the Uplifting Aromatic. This gives us a bubble and increases our attack power. For the stats of the build, we are level 150. We have 55 Vigor, 12 Mind, 40 Endurance, 70 Strength, 14 Dexterity, 14 Intelligence, 15 Faith, and 9 Arcane. I started with the Prisoner class, so my Dexterity and Intelligence are just naturally high. However, you will need 15 Faith because we have a couple incantations that are going to be necessary for the build. So, the first one of those incantations that we are using is the buff called Flame Grant Me Strength. This one gives a nice physical attack power buff, which I think it's about 15%, so it's very huge. We then have the Bestial Sling, Stone of Garunk, and last but not least, the Bestial Vitality. So these are just a few incantations to make the build a little bit better and give us a little bit range in a build where we don't have a whole lot of range, since it's primarily strength weapons and mostly melee. So now we're going to talk a little bit about how you're going to be using the build, some of the strengths and weaknesses of the build as well. So first we're going to be talking about how you should be using this build. So firstly, we always want to start off with the buffs. So if you're getting ganked, a lot of times I don't like to use the Uplifting Aromatic if it's a fair 1v1. However, if it is a gank, I always throw on the Uplifting Aromatic first because it gives us that bubble, followed by I take my Wondrous Physic because it lasts the longest, and then I will do the Flame Grant Me Strength to give me that nice bonus attack power. And if you buff up in that order, you won't be missing out on any damage, because I believe the Uplifting Aromatic damage boost doesn't stack with Flame Grant Me Strength. I could be wrong, but it really didn't seem like it stacked with it. So I always do that first just in case. I'm not entirely sure. You guys could maybe test that and see if it works. But either way, once you get all these buffs out of the way, this build kind of relies on two main attacks, and that will be your weapon skill and the jumping attack. So these are going to be the attacks that do the most damage. You don't necessarily need to use them, and that's what I like about this build, is the fact that it has a lot of versatility. Since you are using Ultra Great Swords, you have a ton of range, so you could actually use the running L1 attack, which works very well as you can just use the crouched R1 attack, which is kind of like a poke. And this build actually has a lot of versatility in terms of the moveset. It's not like something like Rivers of Blood, where you just spam the same thing over and over and over again. It actually has a solid moveset, and it's overall pretty fun to use. I actually had a lot of fun using it. But like I said, the strongest part of the build will be the jumping attack, as well as the weapon skill. They do tons of damage, as you guys are going to see in these PvP clips. I was able to catch people with some of the jump attacks, and it did insane damage. As for some of the drawbacks of the build, this is pretty much the same across the board for strength builds and just builds in general where you use these very heavy weapons, and that's the fact that the recovery time is pretty terrible. So they were recently buffed, and that's kind of what prompted me to make this build. However, you could tell that it's still very sluggish, and a lot of times people were able to get off combos if I was going to miss a hit. So it can be very detrimental to you if you miss a hit, And that's why I feel like this build can kind of struggle, and just strength builds in general is just because of that slow recovery time after you hit, and if you miss, it's super devastating to you, especially if someone has like Moonveil. I fought a guy with Moonveil like 2 or 3 times, and if I missed, I was pretty much dead, because Moonveil does an unnecessary amount of damage and it disintegrates my health bar in one hit. So that's one of the main points of this build, and one of the things you definitely want to be careful of is just time your attacks and be careful of getting into these long animations, because you could easily find yourself in a position where you can't really recover as fast and they're able to poke you for completely free. So you just want to be careful, because there's definitely a lot of recovery time after you swing, because the swords are gigantic. So overall, I had a lot of fun with this build, and I really liked the fashion of the build. It kind of gave off that like barbarian kind of look, where I had the wolf's head as well as just kind of like the barbarian garbs. It just looked really good in my opinion, and overall, like I said, I had a ton of fun with this build. It's pretty solid too. I haven't tried it out much for PvE purposes, but I'm assuming since, you know, you can do the jumping attack and it does like over 1700 damage, it's probably pretty good, you know, when you can do that amount of damage in one hit, as well as the weapon skill does a lot of damage as well. So the build definitely does good damage, and it's a lot of fun to use. But that's pretty much it for today's video. If you guys have any specific builds you want to see in the future, just make sure you comment them below, and the comment with the most likes, I will be making that build. However, if I see a comment that I really like, a unique build or something, any ideas you guys might have, if I like it a lot, I will just make it regardless of the amount of likes it has. So the next one I'm going to be doing is probably a dual dagger build, so you guys can be looking out for that in the future. But that's pretty much it for today's video, so thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next time.